A warm welcome to all of you who've joined us this morning to this seminar hosted by Baxi Heating, part of the BDR Thermea Group. My name is James Higgins. I work for a company called GemServe, and I'm honoured to have been invited to facilitate this morning's session with you. So just turning to the subject of our discussion today, successful decarbonisation of heat is going to require changes to almost every existing property in Britain. This in turn will require a conversation with consumers unlike any before. So this topic for discussion today is, isn't it about time that we got the discussion started? Now, having worked in heat and energy efficiency policy for over a decade, it's my view that actually the conversation is yet to begin, yet there are signs for optimism. Last summer, the UK's first Citizens' Assembly on climate change reported its findings, and amongst the many interesting conclusions for those of us interested in the energy transition, Assembly members emphasised their support for local, tailored solutions, tailored for individual households, with increased choice and reliable and clear information for the public. And on the subject of technology, at least 80% of Assembly members strongly supported each of hydrogen, heat pumps and heat networks as being part of the future energy transition. So installers will also have a really vital role to play. With this in mind, Baxi recently approached their installer community to take the temperature. They asked installers what they knew about low carbon heating technologies. I'm now going to play a video which should give you a flavour of their response. So hopefully the video is going to play for us now.
Hydrogen, what do we know about hydrogen? Not much really at all. I think is it like like a water gas, is it?
As a business prepare would be more training to see what would be on offer in regards to giving customers incentive to do it, and also what the implications to me as a business would be. The more expensive it is at the moment, which is paramount for everything, customers are very, very unlikely to go for it. But as the technology obviously improves over time, I can see it filtering down and again being viable. So the bottom line for that would be training, and also information and literature to pass on to customers.
Brutally honest, I don't know anything about low carbon heating, and nor will my customers. I don't think it's going to affect my business because we don't know nothing about it. I don't think it's going to be a good idea, and we don't know much about it.
Hydrogen, I think, is going to be the future, although it does have its dangers in terms of safety. I think it's very, very useful.
Baxi are actually trialling a 100% hydrogen boiler at the moment, along with another manufacturer, and also their trials with a small percentage of hydrogen going into natural gas, to see how that works as well.
Sounds like a much greener way of going about it, with like zero emissions from what I gather. So that's probably the way we'll go, because I know nothing about heat pumps. So hopefully if you guys can bring out a hydrogen boiler and show or get us on a course to do it, then we'll be fitting them.
So good morning, and thank you for joining us today, and thank you, James, for that introduction. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to welcoming the Minister Callanan for the important work that he and his colleagues across government are undertaking to address the issue of decarbonising our economy. Both as an industry and a nation, we're facing big challenges in the coming years to transition our energy needs. And it's great to see the government and our industry actually aligning to tackle these issues together. I wanted to share that short Vox Pops video with you all as a starting point, because to me it really does provide something of an insight into one of the key challenges that we face as an industry: winning the hearts and minds of our customers for the energy transition that lies ahead of us. It can't be taken for granted that all our stakeholders are ready to take this journey with us. As an industry, and working closely with the government, we will need to mobilise persuasive and clear messaging about the benefits of energy transition. I'm sure this is a subject that we're going to be coming back to in our discussion today and in the coming months. And as James said, I joined Baxi Heating in September of last year, And in that time, I've been really enthused by the ambition of our UK business and of our group parent company, BDR Thermea, to be at the heart of this heating transformation that will be required to achieve the UK's climate targets. We understand, we know we play a prominent role in both the residential and commercial heating market, so providing heating and hot water solutions to millions of UK homes and businesses. And as such, I believe we have a huge responsibility to drive positive and long-term sustainable change. We've been putting in place the right building blocks within our business for some time. We have a number of projects to dramatically reduce our own carbon footprint and an array of innovation initiatives which will help our customers to reduce their own emissions at the same time as delivering affordable, reliable and long-lasting heating systems. We're building on 150 years of heritage and reputation, and so there's a great desire in our business to drive sustainable energy solutions well into the future. I've been delighted to pick up that baton and launch what we believe is a groundbreaking promise to revolutionise the way we heat our homes and buildings. Future generations will judge us by our actions, and Baxi's pledge is to be carbon neutral in all our UK and Ireland operations by 2030 and to lead the phase out of carbon intensive heating by ensuring every product we make from 2025 will work with low carbon energy. We made this announcement at the same time the Prime Minister was launching the government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, which we were delighted to see reinforced in the recent Energy White Paper. We've also noted the recent 6th carbon budget advice from the Climate Change Committee calling for a phase out of new fossil fuel boiler sales by 2033. So it's no accident that our commitments tie in closely to those of the government and the wider policy making community. We can and must pursue wholesale transformation as a company. However, it cannot happen unless we work in partnership with our heating industry colleagues, the wider energy sector and policymakers. This will be a shared endeavour. There are some aspects we can and should commit to unilaterally, however. We've committed to a portfolio of greener, cleaner products that will work with low carbon fuels by 2025, either directly, such as hydrogen boilers, heat pumps, smart electric water heating and heat networks, or hydrogen-ready boilers that can be converted after installation. I'm personally committed to delivering those low-carbon solutions to homes and businesses and to driving down costs through innovation and product evolution, building on our ambition to make the world a better place for future generations. I'm also greatly excited that as part of the Green Industrial Plan, the Prime Minister has committed to create the first hydrogen-heated neighbourhood by 2023, the first village by 25 and the first entire town by the end of the decade. And we intend to be at the vanguard of this mission and are currently developing and testing one of the UK's first 100% hydrogen boilers. We've been working closely with the government to trial hydrogen technology, and to date we've been involved in the UK's Hydrogen Task Force and Hyperheat projects, together with live demonstrations at High Street in Cumbria and Low Thornley near Gateshead. And we've recently introduced a new range of heat pumps to our portfolio of sustainable heating products. These will be targeted towards a wide range of markets, including new build and rural properties. Our objective is to support the UK-wide aspiration for 600,000 annual heat pump installations by 2028. I also wanted to mention today the importance of hot water. For many low-carbon heat technologies, hot water storage is a necessity. Hot water production also makes up a significant proportion of the typical household energy bill. In the most efficient new build homes, it is likely to become the largest component. There are 9 million hot water cylinders currently operating in the UK, and we think this is a major untapped resource. Over the past 18 months, the award-winning user project has been trialling smart hot water technology, which enables an everyday hot water cylinder to become part of the future energy system. So it's our vision to be a sustainable leader in the heating and hot water sector today and tomorrow. We do have a responsibility to tackle climate change, not only for ourselves, but for future generations. And this doesn't stop in our products, but also how we operate as a more efficient and environmentally conscious business. This isn't just about playing our part in a more sustainable future, important though that is. It's also sound business and a strategy that will help our people, the installer community and partners in the wider UK economy to benefit and grow. Delivering cleaner and greener heating systems is fundamental to achieving net zero, and it will also be central to the growth of our business and industry over the next 10 years. The bottom line is that our customers desire sustainable, affordable and reliable warmth. If we can deliver that, we will be successful, and our pledge means that our offer to customers we will have to change in order to deliver a sustainable future. We need to work together with all of you and the government if we are to take our customers with us on this journey and to ensure the transition to a clean future is both practical and just across our entire society. So for me, this is just the start, and I can't wait to see how far we go. And with this in mind, I'm really delighted today to hear insights from the experts on our panel on how they view the challenge in hand and how the industry can adapt together to deliver. Thank you, James.
Thanks, James. I should give all credit to James because it's basically his fault that I have a job, having originally employed me in the sector a long time ago when I worked on heat decarbonisation, and I'm delighted to be back because it's still, as James said, 10 years on, an issue that we haven't really started discussing and is very close to my heart, and indeed one of the reasons I took the job at Energy UK, where we cover the whole energy system. And the important thing to note about Energy UK is that firstly, we're technology neutral, but secondly, we've got everyone from generators to retailers, which means we look at not just the infrastructure, including boilers and heat pumps, but also the customer proposition that you need to put around those things. And so in short, our position is you need all of the above, and we follow the CCC pathway, which is actually 750,000 heat pumps by 2028, though the Prime Minister's 10-point plan has committed to 600,000. And then hydrogen in other applications, and we are also a member of the Hydrogen Task Force, and looking to see what we can do in the UK, particularly having been an oil and gas nation, particularly with our ability as a producer to push the hydrogen economy as we decarbonise. So there are lots of missing pieces though, particularly on heat, and industry is keen to crack on. So in that sense, it was disappointing that heat and building strategy that we're all waiting for has been delayed. Though, you know, once the Minister joins, I'm sure they'll be able to say more about it, because we do know that there's going to be quite a lot in it. And I think government is aware that the biggest challenge now for UK emissions is about our building stock. You know, that's both making our buildings more energy efficient, but also greening our heat. And so I think it's worth reflecting on what we need to see in that strategy and some areas of change. The first is this point about the customer journey and the customer proposition. There's a whole able to pay market that will need both incentives from government in terms of getting the costs of technologies down and getting them to scale, but also a sense that maybe the energy retailers can step in and help make the installation of low carbon heating technologies attractive. So we've got members that are very interested, for example, in the price signals in the market that would enable them to get an electric heat pump away. The second thing that we are very keen that government makes sure they do is look after vulnerable and fuel poor customers, so those not in the able to pay bracket. And there's a big conversation in government going on about affordability of decarbonisation right across the piece, and that is so important in heat, given the nature of heating bills and its role to play in fuel poverty. The third thing is this piece about market design. I think one of the reasons government has shied away a bit from heat decarbonisation is it's really complicated. We've got lots of different kinds of buildings, lots of different kinds of people living in those buildings, and now an increasingly complex energy system where, as we've just heard, you know, a water storage facility in your house might be something that we use as an energy service in the wider system, and getting the market design and the policy and regulatory levers right for all of that is complex, but it is also hugely exciting. And the last thing I'd say, because it hasn't been mentioned yet, is there is an element of this that has to be a bit whole house. You know, we've got to get energy efficiency right alongside heat. In terms of why policy is important, I think we should learn our lessons from what we've seen in offshore wind and the sectors of the economy that have decarbonised rapidly. And what we saw there was long-term market certainty, a market design that allowed competition and new propositions to come forward in terms of building offshore wind and it being able to compete with established technologies. And consistency and a long-term commitment which enabled a supply chain to build up. And we have seen that longevity means innovation. So I don't think we should spend our time looking backwards, but that's one of the issues with things like the Green Homes Grant being cancelled, is that we have this start-stop in the supply chain. And I want to finish on the supply chain because I think they're often overlooked, and I'm so delighted. I loved watching your video because I think getting the message out to installers, getting training right for installers, making sure our installers can do a heat pump and a boiler, making sure that we build from 8,000 installers to 30,000 installers is the silver bullet we need to get heat decarbonisation done, and a huge contribution to the government's green recovery agenda. And I'll stop there.
I'd just like to say I agree with everything Emma said there, so that makes it quite easy, doesn't it? But so yeah, I'm Ian Rippin, I'm the Chief Exec of the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, MCS for short, and we've got masses of data and analysis on deployment of microgen technologies, which include heat pumps. So to answer the question that's been posed, yes, I mean, I don't think consumers fully appreciate that the majority of their carbon emissions actually come from heating and hot water for their homes. So I think that needs to be better understood. But maybe to give some insights from the data that we hold. So for the first time in our 14-year history, MCS has done a detailed analysis of who buys what, where, when, in terms of what's been installed, who installed it, what types of technology, in what parts of the country. And we've taken our data and washed it together with things like census data, fuel poverty, off-gas grid, so to really get an insight of the consumer, the green consumer, and where are they and what do they look like. So in a report that we published last week called Renewing Britain, this sort of details, it looks at policy impact as well. So I'd agree with Emma in terms of disappointment over the closure of the Green Homes Grant, and hopefully we get something, a more sustainable long-term policy that installers and consumers can make their own investments in. So looking at what from where we sit in the market, we can see that government policy certainly has encouraged increased adoption. And I suppose the leading policy, if we were to rank these things, is the feed-in tariff for solar PV. And we saw a dramatic increase in solar PV installations following the launch of the feed-in tariff back in 2010. And that was coupled and accredited with a sharp decrease in the cost of a standard 4 kilowatt system from over £13,000 pre-feed-in tariff fit to £6,000 in 2011. So we've been able to track this rise, as I call it, the green consumer, and identify the relative forests of renewable energy uptake versus the deserts where these things hadn't taken root. And what's interesting from a consumer point of view is that one of the main attributes seems to be professional occupations and those that are in skilled trades. And I think this boils down to people understanding the renewable energy technology and the benefits for their homes. So that's our conclusion, that the more you know about this stuff, the more likely you are to be open to having it in your home. I mean, regionally, we see that Greater London, it has the lowest adoption of things like heat pumps, 1 in every 72 households. And that includes some of the more affluent London boroughs. And so able to pay is not the only factor that's influencing renewable energy uptake. In fact, some of the highest levels of deployment are actually in areas of high fuel poverty. Unsurprisingly, rates of installation are mainly in rural areas, and certainly for renewable heat, where significant numbers of households are off the gas grid. And for those sorts of areas, the Orkney Isles, where no homes have access to the gas grid, is the forerunner. In more rural areas, Cornwall is the leader in terms of sheer number of installations. But Orkney's top of the list in terms of installations per household at 25 20% of households. So what are these forests then? It seems to me that they create an enabling environment for things to take root, and that is a combination of national linked to local policy, community and consumer support, so real engagement and actually a sense of pride you get from talking to installers and installations, for example in Orkney, and then the financial support to make the right decision. So the Orkney Islands is absolutely the superstar local authority, as I say, but there are also places of urban installations in places like Sunderland and Wrexham, and what we see there is local communities coming together on bulk buying schemes, trying to understand the technology for themselves with support from local authorities. So this is a national policy, local policy engagement challenge. And I think where we are now in the adoption cycle, if you like, the 1.3 nearly million installations that we've got records on from the last 10 years, essentially these are the innovators, the early adopters. We're now moving up the curve and we're getting into the early majority. People like me who are pragmatists, who need to trust that the technology is going to work for them. So environmentally conscious, but unlikely to want to work hard to achieve a low carbon footprint unless they can see a clear path ahead of them and need to be convinced. So that's the insights from MCS. I hope that's useful, and absolutely yes, the conversation needs to start now with consumers.
Thanks very much. So I'm from the Energy Saving Trust, and we're all about consumers. We're in contact with about 1 million consumers every year around sustainable energy and sustainable transport. So I guess I've just got 3 things to say. Apologies, some of them might be slightly repetitive, but they bear repetition. The first one is that you know, this whole event that we're enjoying, it's predicated, as James said in his introduction, and has been covered by the other speakers, on the need to get a conversation going with consumers and with householders around low carbon heating. So I'm sure we all agree with that, but I think the key point is that if you're going to have such a conversation, then of course it really does have to be absolutely open and honest. And I think that means in this case that we have to start the conversation by telling people that change is coming and that this will affect them personally. And as others have touched on, they really don't know that yet. But specifically, really quite soon now, and certainly in less than 10 years, a lot of people are not going to be using conventional central heating boilers, as there are no net zero pathways that don't include this sort of change. I think the reason that we don't have this upfront statement, right, change is coming, let's talk about it, is because most people don't like change. I'm sure I'm one of them. So there's often a bit of a reluctance to spell things out, to say that change is coming. But I think if we are going to engage with householders and having a meaningful conversation, we need to start off by being open and frank about that as a first step. And I don't think it has to be problematic. I think if you spell things out clearly, that doesn't necessarily generate resistance. We've already had something of a similar conversation about electric cars, and most people now accept that they will be making that switch if they're car owners. So the second thing I guess I wanted to flag for the audience is, if you do start that conversation with consumers, then it's a journey, it's a process, it's not a one-off conversation, and you have to get them engaged and you have to convince them, because the whole idea is to do the absolutely necessary thing, that the public buy into the transition to low carbon heating, because politically and realistically it's not going to happen if we don't succeed in that. And the point I'd like to flag is that there's some infrastructure missing that would support that conversation. So we know, I think we all know from other examples of this type of change, the switch to condensing boilers, the digital switch over, things like that, that you need to have an independent, trusted and advice and support service to engage and prepare and convince people for that sort of change. And it's particularly relevant in this case, it seems to me, because the switch to low carbon heating involves people relying for their heating on a technology that is relatively novel, which is kind of code for they know nothing about right now. And it means they have to make a significant capital investment in that technology. So they're definitely going to want to discuss and be informed about it. And at present, there isn't much of advice and support available to them. I think the point that's been made about the installer network, that they're absolutely key to that conversation. But there is also a need for an independent, trusted source of advice and information. And in Scotland, which is incidentally where I'm speaking to you from now, there is such a service. In England, there's no national service of this type. There is some local authority and regional provision, and there is the Simple Energy Advice digital service, which is, a very good service for transactional support. If you know what you want to do, it absolutely does help you do it, but it's not really designed for engagement and reassurance and persuasion that this type of conversation we're considering here needs. So I would say that outside Scotland, a trusted person-centered advice support service is a missing piece of the ecology for change, and it needs to be filled in. And then thirdly, and nearly lastly, coming to the supply chain, and specifically the heat pump supply chain, I do think it's kind of worth considering the numbers here, because I'm sure we all absolutely agree the supply chain needs to start skilling up and ramping up now. We've got the current UK heat installation numbers are around 30,000 a year at the moment. Government ambition, as I think Emma mentioned in the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, for some 600,000 a year in England alone by 2028. That ambition is really necessary, it's essential, and it's absolutely to be applauded. But the key point is that's a 20 times increase in 7 years, which is kind of eye-watering growth. It's about the same as the mobile phone market when it was first taking off. But not to state the bleeding obvious, but a heating system is a much bigger purchase than a mobile phone. You don't have to install your mobile phone in your house, and you don't need several skilled tradespeople to do it. So there's a real supply chain challenge in that amount of growth, in that screeching acceleration. And the main thing that can be done about it to encourage it is, and I think this is also a point that's been made earlier, but absolutely needs hammering home, you have to provide certainty. So financial support from the public purse will be as important as it always is in market transformation. But the equally valuable thing that really only government can provide, and which costs a lot less, is certainty. If government is clear to stakeholders that there will be hundreds of thousands of heat pumps installed in UK homes over the next few years, and by clear I mean implementing consistent policies which encourage growth of this market, which they're committed to for a decent period of time, which in practice is probably something like 3 to 5 years, then I think we all know the supply chain will respond. But conversely, if government isn't clear and committed, the supply chain won't respond, because the necessary investment, particularly in current conditions, just won't come forward where there's a risk of stop-start policies. So certainty is everything, I think. And that's me, really. I just wanted to finish with a plea, which again reflects something that Emma said, not to forget energy efficiency. So when you put a heat pump in a home, when you put a hydrogen boiler in a home, if you put a fabric-based energy efficiency around that, it can be smaller, it can cost less, the bills will be less. The two go hand in hand, and we absolutely mustn't forget about continuing to invest in domestic energy efficiency. Thanks.
As you mentioned, I'm responsible for the energy efficiency clean heat agenda in BEIS, and these are, of course, our vital areas in our plans to reach net zero. And I've been really interested to hear about some of the work that you are doing. I saw your presentation earlier to move the sector forward, and I'm particularly interested in hearing some of the ideas about how we can work together to drive forward action in this important sector, because of course tackling emissions from buildings will take many years to deliver, but it's a journey that we have to start on now. As you're also aware, in 2019 the government set a legally binding target to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions from across the UK economy by 2050. Meeting that target will require virtually all heat in buildings to be decarbonised and heat in industry to be reduced to close to zero carbon emissions. Now, of course, we don't know yet the optimal mix of technologies that will be available by 2050, but we do know that there are actions that can be taken now which could be beneficial to all of us in the path to net zero. That includes continuing to invest in research and innovation in hydrogen for heating. It's growing the market for heat pumps, which has been referred to, and other low carbon technologies. And it's continuing to improve the energy efficiency of our buildings, other point made previously, which will ensure that they are ready for the transition to low carbon heating. All low carbon heat and energy efficiency measures will need to be deployed in a way that works for households, way that works for businesses, and at the same time protects vulnerable consumers, including those living in fuel poverty. Heat pumps are expected to be the principal technology for new homes and businesses, and in particular buildings off the gas grid. And I certainly welcome the introduction of Baxi's new range of low carbon heat pumps to its portfolio of sustainable heating products, and that will certainly help us in our ambition to reach 600,000 annual heat pump installations by 2028. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Baxi for their continued work on the High for Heat programme to prove the safety and feasibility case for hydrogen as a viable low carbon heat source, and to support the development of hydrogen ready appliances. As we committed in the Energy White Paper, we plan to consult later this year to seek views from stakeholders on the role that hydrogen ready boilers might play in the transition to net zero. I also believe that public engagement is a vital component of our work to decarbonise, since the public will need to take action to change the way that they heat their homes, their workplaces. And so I'm genuinely very interested in hearing your views on how we could bring the public with us on this journey as we progress to mass transformation to low carbon heating. The government recognises that low public awareness of the carbon emissions that are created by heating currently presents a considerable barrier to the large-scale deployment of low carbon heating, despite public concern being about climate change being at an all-time high. We have to make sure that consumers have the right information, so we want to work with the industry to explore how best to improve our communications, and it's important that government sets out a holistic approach to energy efficiency and to clean heat, and that is why we are currently focused on delivering our heat and building strategy, which will go further to set out the specific packages of measures, technologies and legislation.
For today's gas installer to move into low carbon heat services, there's likely to be a significant training and certification cost. Is there a role for government to help reduce this cost barrier in order to help grow the supply chain needed for large scale rollout?
Thank you, Jeff. Minister, would you like to come in at this point, and then perhaps Karen as well afterwards?
Sure, of course. It's a very good point. From a departmental point of view, we're currently undertaking work to understand the existing skills base and the mechanisms for, of course, increasing the number of installers, including the off-gas grid installer skills research project, which is currently ongoing and is due to conclude shortly. Of course, we're working with our colleagues in the Department for Education to ensure that new entrants to the market receive high quality heat pump training via further education routes. And we're continuing to work closely with industry to develop new core competences for low carbon heating systems. You may be aware that we've established a Green Jobs task force with key industry bodies to produce an action plan for net zero skills across a range of sectors. And our aim is to deliver 2 million net zero jobs by 2030.
Thank you, Karen. You're now on mute, Karen. I think you've just muted.
Sorry. So a really great question, and I guess, you know, for low carbon heat to grow consumer confidence, what I would say is protection is paramount. Therefore, there is a really key pivotal role for skills in certification. This works really well today in the case of the Gas Safe Register with over 130,000 registered operatives. So for me, this scheme could be expanded upon to accommodate hydrogen, for example, into the future. In the case of other low carbon options, comparable schemes exist today, including, you know, Ian mentioned at MSC. And if we're to achieve the government's ambition to grow heat pumps installations significantly, we do need to encourage today's gas installers to train and achieve certification. So as Emma pointed out earlier on, moving from 8,000 to 30,000 without a skilled operative base in those sufficient numbers, we're all going to fall at the first hurdle. So in our view, there is a case to incentivise growth through whichever delivery mechanisms are deemed fit.
Do you think the language about banning boilers risks confusing customers, given the potential role for hydrogen and bio-LPG, for example, that would see a form of boiler installed?
I would say that you don't want to use negative words in the conversation, to be honest. So you shouldn't talk about banning boilers. You should talk about the advantages of moving to low carbon heat. You can talk about things with heat pumps like, steady background heat, the comfort that involves. You can point out to people, I know it's not their primary motivator, but it is a motivator that, they're making a contribution to addressing climate change. You can characterize the new technology. People like new technology. They're positive about new technology as long as it works. So you can characterize it as moving forward to the next generation of heating systems. I think you have to have a conversation on positive terms.
Thank you, Mike. Emma, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think there's two things in that question, really. There's one about the language that we use to talk to consumers, as Mike has just discussed. And my personal view agrees with him that if you look at all the research on behaviour change, the positive case works much more effectively than the negative one. And just in general, I've worked on decarbonisation for a long time, and things that are done to people are much more likely to cause a political backlash than a sense of people participating and having choice. Then there's what you do about that. So there's a kind of language about how we talk to people, but then there's the regulatory instruments used to get the change away. And your question is about actually, given that we're changing from traditional gas boilers to largely heat pumps, and then with gas and other applications for heat, and that we've got to get a big change to electrification away, at least in these decades. What do you do to cause such a big shift, and how do you nudge consumer behaviour when it's just such a big change in technology? I think what the government's done is right, which is they've got basically a phase out in new build, and then the rest of it is actually about, I think, incentives and getting the market framework right. And what I say to you on the positive case is, what's almost never discussed is when the route to market is through a retailer and it's going to be part of a wider package of energy services, and it's a much more attractive proposition than just a thing in your cupboard. That is a very different business proposition than an exchange of like for like, or a feeling that something's being taken from you. And so I think the government is likely to look at incentives to get the market way, to get scale up, getting the regulatory framework right. But above all, I'd really like them to think about how you can help those that are doing the selling get the proposition right, and that's about price signals and things, and the difference between the cost of electricity and gas, and all kinds of things that we could do that aren't a ban. And in the long run, I'm technology neutral, so I guess I get to kind of have my cake and eat it in this conversation.
Great, thank you, Emma. And Ian, do you want to just come in at this point, and then Jeff will go to you for a couple more questions.
Yeah, very happy to. Just picking up on something Emma said there, I think the installer is critical to this, the supply chain, and we know from our research that if you get an installer that understands the options that can be presented to their customer, that is a key influencer. So at the point where your gas boiler's gone bang, or you're considering a replacement for an old oil-fired heating system, if your installer says to you, and he's almost evangelical about low carbon heating, and can present those options and say there might be a different way to do this, and you can make your contribution to the fight against climate change, we know that can be a real influence. In fact, one of the key influences. So yes, the supply chain's really important, but a really committed, engaged supply chain, which is why this initiative that Baxi are taking is really important. Just to go all the way back to that first question, I think there's we've seen real benefit from the Green Homes Grant Skills Training Competition. I think that's the right approach that ties together an investment in vouchers for training, and also vouchers that can be redeemed to become certified. And certainly MCS is keen that your training then leads quite easily into certification. So it's a single process, if you like. That's not been the case in the past, and we've got to make things more accessible. So yeah, I think initiatives like that help the supply chain, but then get that real engagement in front of customers, that's got to be part of the answer.
Do you think there'll be a way of installing renewable energy sources on older properties more successfully when they don't necessarily have the capability to increase the insulation? Working for an housing association, we've had to go back to oil in some cases. Matt then follows up with, not all off-grid rural homes will be suitable for a heat pump due to hard to treat factors, etc. You know, is this really the best way to kickstart the heat pump market? And then really cutting to the heart of the matter, we've got Andy Parker. Hybrid systems, when partnered with decarbonised fuels such as bio-LPG, can deliver the required carbon reductions. Should these be supported to allow time for the energy efficiency measures to catch up? So I think there's a nice sort of correlation between all those questions there.
Well, I mean, yeah, the fundamental basis of the questions is correct in that, you know, of course, not every home will be suitable for a heat pump, but we've modelled the housing stock to determine suitability, and current estimates suggest that around 90% of homes in England and Wales are considered to have sufficient energy efficiency and, of course, internal electrical capacity, certainly for a low temperature heat pump, and even more homes are potential with a high temperature one. But of course, there are always going to be some properties, some housing archetypes that will pose specific challenges. You know, I mean, terraced houses, for instance, and flats will have a limited space for the heat pump outside, and of course, listed buildings present a challenge. But you know, just to emphasise the point that were made earlier, that energy efficiency is going to be key to this. You know, we always take, in my view, we should take a fabric first approach. And you know, of course, innovation will continue to help us out on this at all. In going forward in the future, we're continuing to invest in innovation, new technology, new processes will come forward. So I think the vast majority of homes will be eligible, but there'll always be one or two off-gas grid in rural areas, etc. that probably won't.
Thank you, Minister. Let's bring Karen in again. Karen, what's the Baxi view on rural heating?
I mean, I think, you know, a lot of, and I've seen some questions in the chat as well. I mean, the fundamental thing that I would say to this is that right across the UK, we've got a wide range of building types across all sectors. And, you know, there's not going to be one single silver bullet for everything to solve this, not one single technology solution to solve it. You know, we know that there's differences between rural properties, new build properties. You know, heat pumps will be a sensible choice for some people. Hydrogen is definitely going to be an option for things like the challenge around terraced houses that you just mentioned, Minister, and flats, and you know there are you know, there is a case even for bio-LPG as a potential solution. So the Baxi view on this, and my personal view on this, is that we do need to keep looking at innovation and different solutions. We do need to be a broad church. What we've got to understand and help people understand is their whole, I like the phrase fabric first, and understanding the whole of the, you know, the heating system that you know, a house or a commercial building will have, and come up with solutions that are appropriate for that. But I think the big challenge on that is how do we help educate people in this space? So and that's the start of the journey now, and I think, you know, that's the purpose of starting having some of these discussions today.
Thank you, Karen. I think Emma wants to come in as well here. So Emma.
Yeah, I mean, I think we get questions like this a lot, and I was just thinking about good ways to answer. So firstly, as everyone said, it is we need all the technologies in the box, and oh God, I'm going to do that cliche and quote the Donald Rumsfeld known knowns and known unknowns. And with heating, as with actually a lot of decarbonisation, we do know some things to be true because we've modelled them and we're pretty sure about them. One of which is that we're going to have to do a lot of heat pumps. And the reason for that isn't just about heat, it's about decarbonising the whole economy and the best mix of technologies across the piece. But it's also because they're available now and we need to kind of crack on. And so there's that bit of it. We also know there are some properties that are not going to be suitable for that solution, so we'll need other things. And we know that we're probably going to have to do quite a bit of heat network. So we know some things that are true. What I'd say is what we've learned from decarbonising power, in that you do the easy things first, basically. And so long as we're making sure we look after vulnerable and fuel poor people, I think the plan over the next decade is just to crack on and get these things to scale. And if there's a message for government, I think quite often it feels like in heat we're waiting to solve every single bit of the puzzle rather than doing the things that we know we have to do. And this decade, as the CCC have said, is all about ramping up what we already know and doing the stuff we know we can do, making sure vulnerable people are protected in that. But then in the 2030s, tackling the stuff that's a bit more challenging. And so, I mean, the straightforward answer is yes, of course, we need all technologies, and including probably hybrids. But there's a lot that we can do and should be getting on with now.
The electrification of heat demonstration projects suggests that the majority of homes are suitable for heat pumps and there's high consumer appetite and demand, particularly amongst early adopters. How do we move these into the mainstream? Effectively, is the gist of that question.
Brilliant. Mike, over to you.
Okay, well, heat as a service, that's an interesting one. I suppose, I mean, the simple answer is I'm not really sure. I don't think anyone is sure if it can become a model. Certainly there are a number of, market barriers to it at the moment. But I suppose my concern about it is that you're, in effect, if we're having the conversation with householders, what we're saying is, first of all, you've got to have new technologies, and then would you like to have this new model of how you actually buy your heat? And you're kind of, you're asking them to do two steps forward at once. So I think it's something that needs to continue to be investigated, and one can see pilots coming either from the market or perhaps with government support, and that would be an interesting thing to do. But I don't think we should kind of wait until we've got that sort of financial innovation package in place to push forward with the transition, because there are simpler ways, things like green mortgages and so on, where you can put together financial instruments that people are actually familiar with, and you're not going to get this, oh God, I've got to do this and that means I've got to do that barrier to the conversation. The other point I'd make is that there is a sort of cultural bit around this, because we're in Scandinavia, in places where they do, they're further into the heat as a service model. Of course, a lot of people there already have district heating. They're not, so they are, they are used to the concept of buying heat. That's all they buy, and there's a lot more sort of familiarity with that model behind it. So, for me, the jury's out on this, but I think it's another example of what Emma was saying, where, let's do the easy things and keep looking at the hard things, but not try and do everything at once.
Thank you, Mike. Ian, do you want to come in on this one? Just time check. I know we're coming up against 12 o'clock, so Ian, if you want to come in, and then I'll go to the Minister and to Karen to sort of close us off.
Yeah, and very quickly, I won't talk about district heating or heat as a service, because I think Mike has covered that. I do think we stand at a bit of a crossroads in terms of the relationship we have with heating and heat, and I think most consumers are not conscious of this. And I think Matt Aylott's question is interesting, isn't it? How do we sort of take the demonstration project and the case studies and sort of create almost a Me Too situation where we think, well, they can do it, Fred can do it next door, why can't I? And I think certainly heat pumps is the proven technology. We're going to need hydrogen as well, we're going to need district heating, the whole mix. But I take the point all the panelists have made that we need to get on with this. So waiting for all the solutions in the basket to be there is the wrong approach. We absolutely now need to start that green industrial revolution that the government has been talking about.
Brilliant, thank you, Ian. We could talk about, I could talk about this all day, don't know about anything else, but we should try and keep to time. So Minister, if I could invite you to offer any final thoughts.
Sure, just responding to the heat as a service question, we certainly in government welcome any new business models such as this one. We've provided some funding through the Energy Systems Catapult Smart Systems and Heat Programme to explore their potential, and we're certainly working with Ofgem to remove any barriers that currently exist to such models being developed. But I think we should also bear in mind that any new model such as this, it has to be transparent, it has to be accessible. We need to prevent consumers being locked into contracts, long-term contracts. So I think we'd welcome further trialling of the product to see if there was consumer satisfaction and see what wider impact it would have on the market. But in principle, we're not against the idea.
Thank you, Minister. Karen, over to you.
And yeah, just finishing off that before I close. I mean, on Heat as a Service, we're watching that with interest, and we've actually, as people have alluded to, there have been trials going on. I think it's always good to look at alternative business models. So we've been involved in trials with Energy Systems Catapult. I think that this does work in other areas, in cars, mobile phones, things like that. That servitization and district heating is something that's part of this whole gambit that we need to to work towards. So I take the point. We've got air source heat pumps. We've got hydrogen that's being proven as we speak. The trials are in place. That's the whole point. That and I think we've got some really interesting proven technology coming along the line. I do think as well that we do have to look at all types of business models, because there's the upfront capital barrier for some people is just going to be too high, and I think that's something that we have a responsibility to look at as well. So that's what I would say on that point. And I guess, James, do you want me to sort of close off, because I really would like to take the opportunity to thank the Minister and to our panellists. I hope that you all agree that they've all got very interesting and very informed, well-established views. Emma, Ian and Mike for their engaging and interesting discussion. Like you, James, I could talk about this all day. We've only just started, and it's really good to have these sort of lively discussions. And thanks, James and Jeff, for supporting the conversation as well. And reaching net zero emissions represents an immense challenge, but also a really fantastic opportunity across all aspects of our industry. And here at Baxi, building on more than 150 years of that brand heritage in the UK heat market and drawing on our global strength of our group, we're really committed to playing a part in driving, assisting and facilitating this change. So thank you to all of the attendees that have dialed into this. We've seen some great questions, and I hope we've collectively started to address some of those. And as was said earlier on, we will make sure we go back to all of you with those questions to make sure you get a perspective on all of them from today's event. So that's from me, James. I'll hand back to you.